Mindset Makeover Case Studies. Some people think results change their life. They're wrong. Mindset does. Every breakthrough you admire began as a belief shift no one saw. Today, you're about to see how that shift happens. Introduction. Why mindset is the hidden variable. Most people don't fail for lack of ability or talent. Often, they fail because they believe they will. In other words, success and failure can hinge on something invisible, our mindset. Mindset is the hidden variable that quietly shapes our lives. It's the set of beliefs we hold about our own potential, about what we deserve, and about what is possible. This internal narrative influences every decision we make and every challenge we attempt or avoid. Change the narrative, and you change the outcome. You might have seen it yourself. Two people with similar skills can have very different trajectories. One thrives while the other stalls. What makes the difference? Often, it's not their circumstances or intelligence or luck. It's the perspective they bring. When we think I can't, we stop ourselves before we even start. When we think I can learn, doors begin to open. As the saying goes, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. The mind will find a way to prove what it believes. In the following chapters, we will explore real lifestyle case studies of individuals who transformed their lives by transforming how they thought. These stories span different walks of life: a struggling student, a mid-career professional, an aspiring entrepreneur, an athlete under pressure, and more. Each faced a roadblock that at first seemed external, but ultimately, the key to change was internal. Each learned that by shifting their mindset, they could rewrite their story. Each chapter follows a four-part journey. First, we uncover the pattern, the limiting mindset or belief that held the person back. Next comes the break, a moment of awareness, a wake-up call when they realize this mindset is not the truth and not their fate. Then, the rewire begins. Small shifts in thinking or behavior that slowly replace old habits with new ones. Finally, we see the result, how the person's life changes once the internal shift takes root. This pattern of change is like a formula that you will see, repeated in different forms. By the end, you might recognize these parts in your own life and understand how to initiate a mindset makeover for yourself. Read these stories with a reflective mind. At times, you may even see a bit of yourself in one or more of these people. Let their experiences speak to you. Notice the turning points, the instant something clicks and a new possibility appears. Mindset shifts often start quietly, but their echoes can transform everything from daily habits to lifelong ambitions. This book is narrated in a calm, clear voice to guide you through each transformation. Take your time with it. Pause and think when something resonates. The goal is not just to tell stories, but to spark insights in you, the listener. By understanding how these individuals broke free from their limiting beliefs, you'll gather tools to examine and reshape your own beliefs. Mindset is powerful, but it is not fixed. It can be changed, and when it changes, so do outcomes. If you've ever felt stuck or not enough in some area of life, these case studies will show that you are not alone, and that change is possible. No situation is hopeless when you learn to see it through a new lens. So let us begin this journey of the mind. With an open mind and a willing heart, you may discover the hidden variable that's been there all along. The transformation starts inside. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Student Who Thought She Wasn't Smart. Part 1. The Pattern. Emily was a quiet 14-year-old who had already decided she wasn't one of the smart kids. From her earliest days in school, she carried the belief that her brain just wasn't wired like those of the top students. Math tests came back with red marks. Reading assignments felt like stumbling through darkness. Each poor grade seemed to confirm what she told herself. I'm just not smart enough. Over the years, this mindset became a pattern. In class, Emily avoided raising her hand, afraid to expose what she didn't know. She rarely tried for the honors classes or ambitious projects. What was the point? She believed intelligence was a fixed trait, and she had drawn the short straw. This limiting belief quietly guided her choices. Play it safe, don't stand out, and above all, don't risk proving herself dumb. Part 2. The Break. One afternoon, after a particularly hard math quiz that Emily failed, her teacher, Mr. Thompson, asked her to stay for a moment. Emily braced for a scolding, but instead he gently showed her something unexpected. The quiz paper of another student, one who had gotten a high score. It was covered in messy pencil marks, erased attempts, and reworked solutions. "See this?" Mr. Thompson said. "This A didn't come out of thin air. This student struggled through the problems, trying different strategies, making mistakes and correcting them." He slid Emily's own paper beside it, which was mostly blank after the first few errors. "I see you give up when it gets hard, Emily. But if you keep going, you might be surprised. Your brain can grow. You're not stuck in place unless you decide you are." Emily left that conversation shaken, but in a good way. No one had ever told her that struggling was not a sign of being stupid. It was a sign of learning. That evening, she thought about what her teacher had shown her. The top student wasn't magically smart. They simply tried, failed, and tried again. What if being smart was not a yes or no trait? What if it was something you could develop? For the first time, Emily entertained the idea that her mindset, that deep belief that she just wasn't smart, might be wrong. This realization was her wake-up call. It felt like a door opening. She decided tentatively to experiment with this new perspective. She would allow herself to struggle, to not know things, and to keep pushing anyway, just to see what happened. Part 3. The Rewire. The next week, Emily approached her studies differently. In math, she tackled her homework problems, one step at a time. When confusion set in, she recalled Mr. Thompson's words and refused to give up. Immediately, she tried another approach and another. She asked a classmate for help on a tough equation, something she would have been too embarrassed to do before. Each small action felt like chipping away at a wall of self-doubt. It wasn't comfortable. Her old habits of thinking still whispered, "Why bother? You're not going to get it." But now Emily answered those thoughts. Maybe I can get it, if I practice. She also started reading a bit each night, even outside her assignments, just short articles. on topics she liked, to prove to herself that she could learn new things. At first, progress was slow. The next quiz came back with a C+, instead of seeing that as proof of inadequacy. Emily surprised herself by feeling a spark of pride. It wasn't an A, but it was better than her usual D, and more importantly, she had earned it by not giving up. She continued this new habit of putting in effort and seeking help. Over the following months, her grades steadily improved. More astonishing to Emily was how her attitude was changing. She found herself enjoying the small victories. In learning, the moment a tricky problem finally clicked, or when she understood a chapter in science that had initially baffled her. Each success, however minor, was like evidence dismantling the old belief that she couldn't improve. Part 4. The result. By the end of the semester, Emily's transformation was evident. In math, she managed to secure a solid B on her final exam, a score she once thought impossible. When she saw that grade, she nearly cried, not just out of happiness, but out of a newfound sense of capability. She realized that the letter on the paper mattered less than the journey she took to get there. Emily now knew that her abilities weren't set in stone. In the class ranking, she was still not at the very top, but that didn't bother her anymore. She had proved to herself that she could grow, and that was far more empowering. This mindset shift rippled into other parts of her life. Emily became more curious in class, asking questions even if she wasn't sure they were smart questions. She joined the science club, something she would never have attempted before, and found that she could contribute ideas there. Each new challenge she engaged with reinforced the lesson. Every expert was once a beginner. Every bright mind had to struggle and learn. The belief that held her back, "I'm just not smart enough," had been replaced with, "I'm growing smarter every day I try." Emily's case showed that by changing how she thought about her intelligence, she changed her experience of learning entirely. And in doing so, she learned perhaps the most important lesson of all, that believing in the ability to improve is the first step to achieving it. Chapter 2. The professional stuck at mid-level. Part 1. The pattern. David had been working at his company for nearly a decade and felt like he was running in place. Every year, he watched colleagues, sometimes even those he had trained, climb into higher positions while he remained stuck in his mid-level role. It wasn't that he lacked skill. In fact, David was reliable and knowledgeable in his field. But deep down, he carried a quiet belief that kept him from moving forward. He wasn't management material. He told himself he was the type of person who works hard behind the scenes, not the one leading or making big decisions. Part of him was also afraid of stepping up. He disliked office politics, avoided taking credit, and never wanted to come off as arrogant. Better to be humble and keep his head down, he thought. But year after year, as promotions passed him by, this mindset bred frustration. He felt invisible, unappreciated, yet he was also afraid to do the very things that might get him noticed. This was the pattern. Do good work quietly, avoid risks, and then feel resentful when nothing changed. Part 2. The break. The wake-up call came on a Monday morning when the department head announced a new team. leader. It was a colleague of David's, someone with less experience but a lot of enthusiasm. As everyone clapped, David forced a smile, but inside he was a storm of emotions. Initially he felt anger, hadn't he? Been loyal and proven himself. How could they overlook him again? But that evening, as he stewed over it, another feeling emerged. Uncomfortable recognition. He thought about the colleague who got the job. She was not more talented than him, but she had something he didn't. She made her ambitions known. She often spoke up with ideas and had volunteered to lead a small project last quarter. David, on the other hand, realized he had been waiting for someone to notice his hard work as if it should speak for itself. He remembered his mentor's advice from years ago that he'd brushed off. If you want the next role, start showing up as someone who could be in that role. It struck him now that he had been holding himself back, assuming he wasn't cut out for leadership without ever really trying. That night, David did something he had never done before. He made a list of his accomplishments and strengths. It felt awkward. He was used to downplaying himself. But as the list grew, he felt a spark of pride. Perhaps he had been selling himself short all along. He also listed times he had ideas but kept them to himself, or chances to take charge that he had declined out of fear. Seeing it on paper was eye-opening. The story he'd been telling himself, I'm just not the kind of person who gets promoted, suddenly looked like an excuse, a protective shield against the risk of failing if he tried. This realization was a tough one, but also liberating. It meant that if his mindset was the problem, changing it could be the solution. Part 3. The Rewire. The very next day at work, David began taking small but significant steps outside his comfort zone. In the weekly team meeting, when his manager asked for suggestions on improving a process, David's hand trembled as he raised it. He shared an idea he'd been mulling over for weeks. To his surprise, the manager listened and liked it, and tasked him with developing it further with a couple of colleagues. David left that meeting with his heart racing, part nerves, part excitement. It was the first time in memory he had truly spoken up. Emboldened by that experience, David continued to practice new behaviors. He set up a one-on-one meeting with his supervisor and expressed his interest in taking on more responsibility. This was something he would have never dared before, always fearing it would seem presumptuous. But his supervisor responded positively, even gratefully. They discussed specific skills David could develop to be ready for a higher role, such as presenting to clients and managing a small team. With that guidance, David enrolled in an evening public speaking workshop to conquer his long-time fear of presentations. Each session at the workshop, standing up and speaking to strangers, chipped away at the belief that he just wasn't a leader. He also began volunteering for tasks that he used to shy away from, like leading a portion of team training for new hires. Each step was small, even shaky at times, but they were all in a new direction. As the months went by, David's colleagues began to notice a change. He was no longer the silent worker in the corner. He was contributing ideas and stepping up when opportunities arose. David himself felt the change internally, where he once automatically thought, I'm not qualified to do that. He now thought, I can learn to do that. And if an opportunity scared him, that became a reason too. Pursue it rather than avoid it. His mindset was gradually shifting from self-limiting modesty to quiet confidence. He learned that advocating for himself didn't mean he was bragging. It meant he was taking ownership of his growth. Part 4. The result. About a year after that painful missed promotion, David found himself in a boardroom giving a presentation on a project proposal he had led from start to finish. His heart pounded, but not from fear. Alone, there was also a sense of pride. The presentation went smoothly. When he finished, the applause from his team felt different this time. He wasn't invisible anymore. A few weeks later, management announced that David would head a new initiative as a project manager. It was not a gigantic leap to the executive suite, but it was a clear step up, a promotion that recognized his growth and newfound leadership. When he called his wife to tell her the news, he found himself saying, "I finally got out of my own way." That was the truth of it. By shedding the belief that he wasn't the type to advance, David unlocked his potential that had been there all along. In retrospect, he realized none of the steps he took were out of his reach. He simply had never taken them. The change in his title was the result of a change in his mindset. He stopped seeing himself as stuck and started seeing himself as capable of more. And then he acted on that belief. David's story shows that sometimes the ladder we want to climb isn't pulled up behind us at all. We've been standing at the bottom rung, holding ourselves back. Once he made his mindset over, replacing doubt with a willingness to grow, his career began to move forward. And just as importantly, he felt a new sense of fulfillment at work, knowing he had taken control of his path. Chapter 3. The Entrepreneur Afraid to Launch. Part 1. The Pattern. Priya had a dream that she carried around like a precious secret. For 5 years, she had been nursing the idea of an online design business, a platform to connect local artists with customers seeking unique decor. She talked about it endlessly with close friends, scribbled plans in notebooks, even saved a little money to support herself during the early months. And yet, as each month passed, Priya found a reason to delay the launch. The market isn't good right now. I need to research a bit more. Maybe next year, when I'm more ready. Beneath all the excuses was a deep-seated fear, the fear of failing publicly and proving that she wasn't cut out for entrepreneurship after all. By day, Priya worked at a stable but uninspiring corporate job. Every evening, she would tinker with her business idea, refining details but never pulling the trigger. Her mindset kept whispering that it wasn't the right time, that she wasn't ready. She believed she had to get everything perfect to succeed, and until then, it felt safer to keep the dream on paper rather than risk it in reality. Part 2. The Break. The breaking point came unexpectedly when the corporation Priya worked for announced a round of layoffs. To her shock, her position was eliminated. In one afternoon, the safety net she'd been clinging to vanished. At first, Priya was overwhelmed with panic. Her steady income was gone, and with it, the convenient excuse that her job was the reason she hadn't launched her business. In the days that followed, she updated her resume and began looking for another job. But something had shifted in her mind. Every time she sent an application, a thought nagged at her. What if this is my chance to try my own venture? Still, fear held her back. Fear of financial instability, fear of failure, fear of the unknown. One evening, Priya confided in her older brother, who had always been her sounding board. She admitted how terrified she was to start her business now that nothing was holding her back except her own fear. Her brother listened and then asked gently, "Which do you think you'll regret more in 10 years? Trying this business and maybe failing, or never trying at all?" Priya knew the answer. She'd regret not giving herself a chance. That question struck like lightning, illuminating the truth that not pursuing her dream was already a kind of failure, a guaranteed one. Around the same time, she read an interview with a successful entrepreneur who said, "I never felt ready to start, I just started." These insights together flipped a switch in Priya's mind. She realized she had been waiting for confidence too. Come before action, but in reality, confidence would come from action. This was her wake-up moment. If she was ever going to do it, now was the time. Part 3. The Rewire. Priya decided to treat her startup dream not as a one-shot leap into the void, but as a series of small experiments. Her first step was to create a simple website for her platform. No grand launch, just a basic site to showcase a few local artists she knew. She set herself a deadline of 2 weeks to get it live. Working from her kitchen table, she built the site in small, steady bursts. Whenever anxiety about perfection crept in, she reminded herself, "Done is better than perfect. I can improve it as I go." This phrase became her mantra. Next, Priya reached out to 3 artists in her community whose work she admired. She proposed that they join her platform for a trial period with no fees, just to see if it could generate any sales for them. 2 agreed. Now she had a minimal product, a site with real artwork for sale. The night before she quietly published the website, Priya was so nervous she could hardly sleep. But she pushed through, and when with a few clicks, her idea was finally out in the world. In the following days, Priya fought the urge to second-guess herself instead of immediately worrying about thousands of customers or making the venture perfect. She focused on serving the few users and artists she had. She spent time promoting the site in local social media groups and got friends to share it. To her delight, within the first week, the site made its very first sale, a handmade sculpture by one of the artists sold to a customer 3 towns over. It was a small sale, barely any profit, but to Priya it felt like winning a marathon. That single transaction shattered a heavy belief she'd been carrying, the fear that no one will care about what I create. Someone did care. A stranger had found value in her idea. Each week, Priya set small goals. Reach out to 2 more artists, improve the site's layout slightly, post a new item on the platform's blog about art trends. These were modest, doable tasks, but collectively they started building momentum. Whenever doubt set in, like when a day went by with no website visits, she coached herself to see it as data, not as a verdict on her worth. Okay, today was slow. What can I try tomorrow? She would think, treating challenges as puzzles rather than signs of defeat. Gradually, her fear of failure was being replaced by curiosity and determination. She was rewiring her mindset from "I must not fail" to I can learn as I go, failure or not. Part 4. The result. Months later, Priya found herself in a position she had once only imagined. She was sitting at her own desk in a small co-working space, updating inventory and responding to customer inquiries for her growing online marketplace. The platform was still modest by startup standards, but it was real, earning enough to cover its costs and then some. She had about 20 local artists on board now, and each month more orders trickled in. It wasn't an overnight success story in the flashy sense. No sudden million-dollar investment or viral fame. But it was a steady, building success that she created from scratch. Priya sometimes marveled at how much she had changed internally. The girl who was paralyzed at the thought of launching had become a woman who handled setbacks with resilience. When a partnership with a supplier fell through, she treated it as a lesson and found an alternative. When a marketing idea failed to bring in new customers, she analyzed why and tried a different approach. Instead of seeing these hurdles as confirmation of her worst fears, she saw them as part of the journey. She often remembered her brother's question about regret. Now she woke up every day with the satisfaction that she was truly giving her dream a chance. By changing her mindset from avoidance to action, Priya not only launched her business but also transformed her confidence. She learned that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward. Despite fear, in letting go of the idea that she needed to be perfect or 100% ready, she found freedom to grow. Her venture would continue to evolve, but perhaps the biggest change had already happened within her. Priya's case proved that the hardest part of any journey is often the decision to begin. After that, every step, no matter how small, builds a bridge between fear and success. Chapter 4. The Athlete Who Feared Failure. Part 1. The Pattern. Jordan was known as a talented runner on his college track team, but there was a saying among his teammates: Jordan wins in practice and loses in meets. In training, he could outrun nearly everyone, pushing hard and clocking impressive times. But on race days, something changed. Standing at the starting line of a big competition, Jordan's stomach would knot with anxiety. As the pressure mounted, he would play it safe. He held back on his pace at critical moments or hesitated to make a move to overtake a rival. It was as if some invisible weight was on him whenever the stakes were high. The result: races that should have been easy wins turned into second or third-place finishes, or worse. Coaches and teammates were baffled. Physically, nothing was holding him back. Jordan himself knew the truth, even if he hardly admitted it out loud. He was terrified of failure. The idea of giving his all and still losing was so painful that, unconsciously, he never gave his all. If he didn't fully extend himself, he could always say, "Well, I wasn't really beaten because I didn't try my hardest." It was a shield for his ego. But that shield was also a cage, trapping him in a cycle of underperformance and frustration. Off the track, Jordan's fear showed in other ways. Before every meet, he'd imagined the worst outcomes. Tripping on the start, finishing last, disappointing his coach, or hearing whispers that he'd choked. These thoughts would swirl relentlessly. He became so anxious that he struggled to sleep the night before races. More than once, he even considered faking an injury or sickness to avoid competing in a championship meet just to escape the pressure. He loved running deeply, or at least he used to. Lately, it felt like the joy was gone, replaced by a constant dread of not living up to expectations. Expectations. Mostly coming from himself. This was Jordan's pattern. Practice hard, build up potential, then let fear take the reins when it mattered most. No one was as harsh on him as he was on himself in those moments. Part 2. The Break. The breaking point arrived at the biggest meet of the season, the regional championships. Jordan had qualified with one of the best times on paper. People expected him to medal, maybe even take first in his event. As the race started, he felt the familiar surge of adrenaline tip into panic. Halfway through, when another runner challenged him for the lead, Jordan felt the fear spike. He worried he'd burn out if he responded too fast. He hesitated just for a second, but it was enough. The other runner surged. Ahead. In the final stretch, instead of fighting with everything he had, Jordan found himself holding back ever so slightly, unconsciously saving face for a loss. He finished third. It wasn't a terrible result, too. Outsiders, but Jordan was crushed. He knew he had more to give and hadn't given it. After the race, Jordan sat alone by the bleachers long after the crowd had dispersed. His coach, a former competitive runner himself, approached and sat down next to him. Expecting a lecture, Jordan was surprised when the coach spoke softly instead. "I saw you hesitate out there." Jordan's eyes stung, because he knew it was true. I'm sorry," he muttered. But the coach shook his head. "I'm not here for an apology. I want to understand what's happening. You train like a champion, but in the race I see a young man running with the brakes on. Why?" At first, Jordan deflected, but under the coach's kind but persistent questioning, the truth spilled out. "I'm afraid of losing," Jordan admitted, voice cracking. "I'm afraid if I give it everything and it's not enough, then what? What does that make me?" The coach nodded as if he'd known. He then shared something from his own past. As a junior athlete, he had lost plenty of races, some by a lot. "I hated it at first," he said. "No one likes to lose. But someone wise told me, if you never risk the heartache of losing, you'll never reach the thrill of your best win, either. You have to run free, Jordan, free from that fear. Even if you fail, especially if you fail, you'll learn something and come back stronger." He patted Jordan on the shoulder and added, "We all see your potential. The only one who needs convincing is you. And you won't convince yourself by holding back. You've got to risk the failure to get the success." That conversation lingered in Jordan's mind for days. It hurt to confront, but he realized his coach was right. His fear of failing was ironically ensuring that he never truly succeeded, by always keeping something in reserve. He was never leaving feeling proud, just safe and disappointed at the same time. He recalled a quote he'd once seen on a poster: "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take." It struck him that by not fully taking the shot in a race, he was guaranteeing a miss. This was Jordan's awakening. The understanding that failing after giving his all would not be worse than the regret he felt. Now, in fact, it might even feel better because at least he'd know he tried his best. He made a resolve. He would rather give a full effort and risk losing than keep living with the question, what if I'd pushed harder? Part 3. The Rewire. With a new mindset taking root, Jordan approached training and competition differently. He worked with the team's sports psychologist on techniques to handle the pressure. They practiced visualization. Jordan would close his eyes and picture himself in a race responding to challenges without fear. Surging ahead when someone tried to pass, finding another gear in the final stretch. At first, even in his imagination, he felt that flicker of doubt, but each time he visualized overcoming it, the doubt's hold weakened. He also learned breathing exercises to calm his nerves before races and a routine of positive self-talk. Instead of the old loop of don't mess up, he started repeating phrases like run free and trust your training. His coach also gave him a practical challenge. In an upcoming low-stakes meet, he instructed Jordan to run as hard as he could from start to finish, ignoring any fear of burning out. The goal wasn't to win or set a record, but to experience giving full effort regardless of the outcome. Nervous but determined, Jordan agreed. In that race, he fought the instinct to hold back. He took the lead early, and when the familiar pain and doubt crept in, he pushed even harder instead of easing up. He did end up tiring in the last meters, and another runner passed him, but he finished a close second, and more importantly, he felt an unexpected exhilaration. Exhausted at the finish line, Jordan was breathing hard, but he was grinning. He hadn't won the race, but he had conquered a personal barrier. The fear that usually clung to him was nowhere to be found in that moment. He had given it everything, and it felt liberating. That experience became a turning point. With each subsequent race, Jordan practiced this new, fearless approach. It wasn't a straight line. Some races he still caught himself holding back slightly. But he was aware now and could correct it. He started focusing on personal best times rather than comparing himself with others every time. If he beat his own record, it was a victory, whether or not it was first place. By shifting the goal to self-improvement and embracing the possibility of losing, he found that racing became fun again. The joy of running, the reason he started in the first place, was returning. Part 4. The result. As the next championship season rolled around, Jordan was a different runner. In fact, a different person. In the qualifying heats and smaller meets leading up, he consistently ran at or near his personal bests, something he had never done under pressure before. His teammates noticed his newfound calm and determination at the starting line. Instead of fidgeting nervously, he would close his eyes, breathe deeply, and even smile to himself before the gun went off. At the regional championships a year after his disappointing third-place finish, Jordan was once again among the top contenders. This time, however, he felt a steadiness inside. When the race began, he ran, with an open heart and full effort from the first lap. In the final stretch, he and another runner were neck and neck. For a split second, the old thought flashed, what if I lose? But he let it float by like a passing cloud and instead told himself, give it everything. His legs and lungs burned as he sprinted flat out to the finish line. He leaned in at the tape, unsure who won until the scoreboard flashed his name at the top. He had taken first place by a razor-thin margin. The victory was sweet, but what made Jordan emotional was not just the gold medal around his neck. It was knowing that he had finally broken free of his fear. Standing on the podium, he realized that even if he had come in second that day, he would have been proud because he hadn't held back. He had discovered that the real opponent all along wasn't the other runners, but his own mindset. By changing it, he unlocked the ability to run at his true potential. Jordan's story shows that when we stop letting fear of failure dictate our choices, we give ourselves the chance to reach our highest possibilities. In learning to risk failure, he finally found success, both in results and in the return of his love for the sport. Chapter 5. The Overthinker Who Couldn't Decide. Part 1. The Pattern. Maya was the friend everyone knew as the overthinker, even for small choices, like picking a restaurant or deciding what movie to watch. She would hem and haw, wanting to consider every option twice. But it was the big decisions in life where this habit really paralyzed her. In college, Maya had double majored because she couldn't commit to one field of study over another. After graduation, she found herself torn between two solid job offers. Day after day, she analyzed them to death, making endless pros and cons lists, researching every detail about each company, fearing she'd make the wrong choice. The irony was that as she overanalyzed, time was slipping away. Her indecision had consequences. One company needed an answer, and, not hearing back, they assumed she wasn't interested. The other, upon learning she had hesitated, rescinded their offer as well. Maya was left with nothing, a victim of her own inability to decide. This wasn't the first time indecision had cost her. She had missed out on vacations because she waited too long to book and the prices soared. She had let relationships fizzle because she couldn't decide how she felt or what she wanted. Deep down, the pattern was fueled by a mindset of fear and perfectionism. Maya believed that for every decision there was one right choice and countless wrong ones, and she felt she had to find that perfect path. Making a mistake seemed catastrophic in her mind. So rather than risk picking wrong, she'd delay, gathering more information, turning the choices over and over in her head. But not choosing was in effect making a choice to stay stuck, and it was becoming clear that this habit was holding her life hostage. Part 2. The Break. Losing both job opportunities was a harsh wake-up call for Maya. At first, she was devastated and angry with herself. In trying so hard to not make a wrong move, she had made the worst move by doing nothing at all. For a while, she wallowed in regret, replaying how she should have just picked one. But in that regret, something shifted. She realized that the pain of missing out was worse than the fear of choosing one and wondering about the other. At least if she had taken a job and it turned out imperfect, she could have learned and moved on. Now she was left with nothing but what-ifs. Around that time, she opened up to her mentor from college about what had happened. Her mentor, a former professor, gave it to her straight. Maya, not making a decision is a decision. You're deciding to let life happen to you. If you keep waiting for absolute certainty, you'll find yourself standing still while life moves on without you. Those words struck a chord. They were tough to hear, but Maya knew they were true. She had been passively letting opportunities slip by, all in an attempt to avoid possible mistakes. She also read an article on analysis paralysis and was startled to see a description of her own behavior written out by a psychologist, constantly seeking more information, fearing the wrong choice, and ending up overwhelmed. It was eye-opening to realize that this was a known trap that many people fall into, and importantly, that there were ways out of it. Her mentor's words and the article combined to form a clear message. Doing nothing was far worse than trying something. It was time to break the cycle. Part 3. The Rewire. Maya decided to rebuild her decision-making muscles, starting small. She set little rules for herself. For example, when going out to eat with friends, she gave herself a 2-minute limit to pick from the menu. No second-guessing allowed once the choice was made. It felt trivial, but this practice was training her brain to tolerate decisions without endless deliberation. She also made a game of flipping a coin for minor decisions. If she truly couldn't decide between two things like going to the gym or taking a walk, the coin toss determined it, and she would honor that choice without question. These exercises felt strange at first, but over time they taught her something important. There usually wasn't a disastrous difference between two decent options. In fact, often both choices would have been okay. The world didn't end because she picked Thai food over Italian, and that realization, carried into bigger things, was liberating. For more significant decisions, Maya adopted a new strategy, setting deadlines for herself. When another job opportunity came up a couple of months later, this time a single offer for a role she was moderately excited about, she resolved to decide within 48 hours of receiving the offer. She listed the key factors that mattered most to her, like growth opportunities and company culture, reviewed them briefly, and then paid attention to her gut feeling. Instead of seeking the elusive 100% certainty, which she finally admitted doesn't really exist, she asked herself, does this feel like a good choice for me with what I know now? The answer was yes, it did. And so she accepted the job, nerves and all, 2 days later. When she hung up the phone after saying, "Yes, I'll join," she felt a wave of relief and empowerment. It wasn't that all her doubts vanished, but she was proud that she had made a decision and taken control. Of course, old habits don't disappear overnight. There were moments she felt the familiar panic of, but what if there's something better? Or what if this choice is wrong? When those thoughts bubbled up, Maya practiced reassuring herself. No choice is perfect. I'll make the best of whichever path I choose. She reminded herself of the painful lesson of losing those offers. Doing nothing is the worst outcome. Over time, these reminders began to stick. Decision by decision, she noticed that her anxiety was easing. It became clear that once a choice was made, she could channel her energy into making it work, rather than endlessly questioning it. Part 4. The Result. Several months later, Maya was settling into her new job. It turned out to be a good role with a supportive team, and she was learning a lot. Was it absolutely perfect? No, there were challenges, and occasionally she wondered how the other path might have been. But she never lingered long on those thoughts because she knew that what she had now was the result of taking action, and she could adjust and grow from here. Importantly, she felt back in the driver's seat of her life. Empowered by her progress, Maya began applying her decisiveness to other areas. She finally moved out of her cramped apartment after swiftly deciding on a new place across town that she liked, instead of analyzing every possible neighborhood for months. She took up a language class she'd been dithering about simply because it interested her. Each time she followed through on a decision, it reinforced the new belief taking root that she could trust herself to handle whatever came from her choices. Maya's transformation was subtle to outsiders, but profound to her. She had shifted from a mindset of fear, always worrying about the perfect choice, to a mindset of empowerment, focusing on making a good choice and then making it right. By learning that very few decisions are irreversible and that she could course correct if needed, she freed herself from the paralyzing need for certainty. Her life began moving forward again. Maya's case demonstrated that often there isn't one right path, but many viable ones, and the real mistake is refusing to move at all. In embracing this, she reclaimed her power to shape her own life, one decision at a time. Chapter 6. The Creative Who Compared Constantly. Part 1. The Pattern. Ethan was a skilled photographer and graphic designer with a keen eye for detail. In theory, he had everything he needed to create beautiful work and even build a name for himself. In practice, however, Ethan often found himself staring at others' work instead of his own. He would spend hours scrolling through portfolios on Instagram and design blogs, marveling at the stunning projects others produced, and then feeling deflated about his own. Whenever he sat down to work on his projects, a voice in his mind would sneer, "It's not as good as what so-and-so did." He had a dozen half-finished pieces saved on his computer, abandoned because he lost confidence in them halfway through. The comparison habit had become Ethan's constant companion. If a peer won an award or landed a big client, he congratulated them outwardly, but inwardly spiraled into self-doubt. "I'm 28 and I've never been featured in a magazine," he'd think. "Look at her. She's only 25 and already successful. I'm falling behind." These thoughts chipped away at his motivation. Instead of inspiring him, other people's success made him question his own path. He also found that when he did create something, he was often unconsciously imitating styles that were getting attention rather than developing his own voice. It was as if he believed the creativity well was a zero-sum game. If someone else was shining, it meant less light for him. This mindset not only stole his joy, it was stalling his career. How could he move forward when he was constantly looking sideways? Part 2. The Break. The moment of insight for Ethan came during a gathering of local artists and designers. He almost didn't go, worried he'd feel inferior among the others. But a friend convinced him to attend. During a panel discussion, one question from the audience was, "How do you deal with feeling like your work isn't as good as everyone else's?" Ethan was shocked to hear the question. It was as if someone had read his mind. But what shocked him more were the answers from the panel of accomplished artists. One painter admitted, "I struggle with that all the time. I have to remind myself not to compare my Chapter 1 to someone else's Chapter 20. A well-known photographer said, "Honestly, social media only shows the tip of the iceberg. You don't see the hundreds of bad shots behind one great." Photo. I've learned to focus on my own journey, otherwise I'd never create anything. Hearing these admissions was a revelation for Ethan. These were people whose work he admired, and they too felt the pull of comparison, but they had strategies to handle it. One phrase stuck with him: "Don't compare your chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 20. He realized he'd been doing exactly that, looking at people who were years ahead in experience or who had different circumstances and using them as a yardstick for his own worth. Moreover, he suddenly saw how much of others' success was invisible to him. He saw the glory, but not the grind behind it. That night, talking with an artist he respected, Ethan confessed how he'd been holding himself back out of a fear of not measuring up. The artist told him kindly, "The only person you should compare yourself to is the person you were. Yesterday, that's the only comparison that matters." This was Ethan's wake-up call. He finally acknowledged that his constant comparisons were poisoning his creativity, and crucially, he now believed it didn't have to be this way. Part 3. The Rewire. Ethan made a conscious plan to change his habits and reclaim his joy in creating. First, he significantly cut down his time on social media and design forums where he was inundated with others' highlight reels. He didn't quit cold turkey, but he set specific times to check them and limited it to maybe 15 minutes a day. With less time scrolling, he had more time to actually create. It was difficult at first. He felt the itch to check what everyone else was doing, but he reminded himself that every minute spent comparing was a minute not spent creating. Next, when he did look at others' work, he approached it differently. Instead of feeling envy or defeat, he tried to learn from it. He would note 1 or 2 things he found inspiring or techniques he could experiment with and then move on without dwelling. He also started to actively celebrate others' successes in a genuine way. When his friend won a design contest, Ethan sent a heartfelt congratulatory message and felt sincerely happy, using it as motivation that, if he can do it, maybe I can. 2, when I'm ready, instead of, he did it and I didn't. This subtle shift started making him feel less like he was in a race against everyone else. Most importantly, Ethan focused on his own progress. He resurrected one of his half-finished projects, a series of photographs blending digital art that he had ditched months ago. This time, he vowed to complete it without worrying whether it was trendy or how it would stack up to others. He set himself a schedule, 1 finished piece per week, no matter what, and he kept a journal alongside it. Each day, he jotted down a small win. Tried a new editing technique today, looks pretty cool, or finally figured out the lighting on that portrait, improvement from last time. These notes were not for anyone else, just reminders to himself that he was growing. At first, that inner voice of comparison still popped up. As he worked on his project, he'd occasionally think, is this original enough? So-and-so did something similar and better. But whenever he caught that, he'd pause and literally look at a sticky note he had put on his desk. Focus on your journey. It was a simple mantra to pull him back to his task. Over weeks, those comparison thoughts lost some of their power. Ethan found himself entering a state of flow more often, immersed in his work without immediately judging it against others. And as he completed each piece of his project, his confidence grew. he began to see his own style emerging more clearly, a blend of moody photography and bold, graphic overlays. That felt true to him. Part 4. The result. After a couple of months, Ethan finished the series he had set out to create. Not only that, he mustered the courage to showcase it. He put together a small exhibit at a local cafe that hosted art nights. In thus past, he might have hesitated to display his work. What if it's not as good as the last artist's show? But now he felt a sense of pride in simply having completed something deeply personal. The night of. The exhibit, he received genuine compliments on his pieces. A few people even asked if he had prints for sale. One attendee remarked on the unique style, saying they hadn't seen something quite like it before. Ethan realized that was because it was his style, something that wouldn't exist if he had kept trying to emulate others. This recognition was a turning point. It became clear that by focusing on his own growth, he had not only found more fulfillment, but his work had improved too. He started getting small freelance opportunities directly tied to the style he developed, rather than random assignments he used to pick up while second-guessing himself. And when he did scroll through social media now, he found he could appreciate others' art without the sting of envy. In fact, he noticed he felt more connected to his peers, understanding that everyone has their ups and downs behind the scenes. Ethan's mindset makeover taught him that creativity isn't a competition, it's a personal journey. The more he stayed in his lane, the faster and freer he ran. A lesson from athletes that applies to artists too. By letting go of constant comparisons, he regained the joy that first drew him to art and unlocked the unique creativity only he could offer. His story is a reminder that the only comparison that truly matters is between who you are now and who you were yesterday. And when he embraced that, his creativity flourished on his own terms. Chapter 7. The Leader Who Avoided Feedback. Part 1. The Pattern. Claire prided herself on being a competent leader. She had climbed the ranks to manage a team of 10 at her company by the age of 40. On paper, her track record was solid, but inside her team there was an unspoken issue. Claire did not welcome feedback at all. Her team had learned to walk on eggshells around her when it came to offering any criticism or even new ideas that might imply the current approach wasn't perfect. Claire wasn't an overt tyrant. She didn't yell or micromanage excessively. However, whenever someone tentatively said, "I have a suggestion," or "maybe we should do this differently," she would tense up. Her typical response was to defensively explain why the way she had set things up was fine, or to give a curt "noted," and then never bring it up again. Over time, her team simply stopped trying. Looking back, Claire realized she had developed this pattern early in her management career. In her very first year as a supervisor, she had received a tough performance review from her boss, highlighting areas for improvement. She had been crushed. Instead of seeing those notes as chances to grow, she took them as personal failures. Ever since, she vowed to never be caught with flaws again. The result was that she became closed off to criticism. She believed a good leader should just know what to do, and admitting otherwise felt like weakness. Internally, she rationalized that no feedback meant things were going well. In truth, she was simply avoiding anything that might make her question herself. This mindset kept her safe from feeling inadequate, but it also created a wall between her and her team. Problems that might have been solved early were left unspoken until they became bigger. Innovation slowed down because no one dared suggest a new approach. Claire was steering a ship without any navigation input, assuming all was well, while under the surface, small leaks were starting to sprout. Part 2. The Break. The reckoning came during a major project deadline. Claire's team was working on an important product launch. She had set an aggressive timeline and a detailed plan which she expected everyone to follow. As weeks went by, she sensed tension in the team, but no one voiced concerns outright. They were polite in meetings, saying everything's fine or we'll make it work. Unbeknownst to Claire, several team members saw a serious flaw in the project approach that was causing repeated last-minute reworks. But because of the culture of silence, they tried to fix it quietly themselves, growing, increasingly stressed and resentful. The project made it to launch, but barely, and with many burned-out team members behind it. A month later, 2 of her most talented employees resigned in their exit interviews, which were handled by HR. Claire received feedback that hit her like a punch to the gut. One employee wrote, "I felt like my own input was never valued. Whenever I tried to point out issues or suggest improvements, it was ignored. It's frustrating working for someone who doesn't listen." Another said, "Mistakes were made in our project that could have been avoided if the team felt safe speaking up. I'm leaving because I don't feel heard or appreciated." Reading those comments was a painful moment of truth. Claire realized that her fear of hearing criticism had not prevented problems. It had allowed them to fester and driven good people away. Instead of protecting her from failure, her feedback avoidance had actually created failures. That evening, she stayed late at the office, replaying the last few months in her mind. She remembered subtle signs. A team member opening their mouth as if to say something in a meeting, then closing it. The unusually high stress levels and overtime hours. She had been so wrapped up in being right that she'd become blind to what her people needed. This was her wake-up call. Claire had to confront the fact that she was the one who needed to change. It wasn't enough to be technically competent. Leadership meant listening and learning, not just giving orders. Part 3. The Rewire. Humbled and determined to improve, Claire set out to change her approach one step at a time. The very next week, she called a meeting with her team, not to issue directives, but to apologize and open the floor. Standing in front of them, she took a breath and said, "I realize I haven't been listening the way I should. I want to fix that. I genuinely want to hear your thoughts on how we can work better." There was silence at first. The team exchanged cautious glances, not sure if this was a trap or a passing mood. Claire continued, handing out index cards. "If you don't feel comfortable saying it out loud now, please write down one thing you think we could improve on, whether it's about our project processes or even my leadership. You can do it anonymously." She meant it. She knew she had to earn their trust. Again, and this was a start. The room slowly came to life. One braver team member raised a hand and spoke up. He mentioned that the timelines were often too tight and that team members felt afraid to say when they were overwhelmed, resulting in mistakes. Claire fought the impulse to justify the schedules. Instead, she nodded and wrote it down. Another chimed in that during the last project, A few people had seen issues in the plan early, but since any questioning in the past had been shut down, they kept quiet. Claire's heart ached at that, exactly what she suspected. She thanked them for telling her. By the end of the meeting, several cards were turned in as well, with useful suggestions and frank observations. It wasn't easy to read some of them. Criticism never feels great. But this time, she framed it differently in her mind. This is help. They are giving me a chance to improve, not attacking me. In the following weeks, Claire took concrete actions based on the feedback. She adjusted project timelines to be more realistic, building in buffer time. She set up a weekly 15-minute check-in with the team specifically to ask, what's working, what's not, what can we do better? At first, these questions were met with hesitation or minor surface-level issues. But she kept asking, and slowly people began to believe that she truly wanted to know. Each time someone voiced a concern or idea, Claire made sure to listen fully without interjecting. If she felt defensive internally, she made herself pause and reflect before responding. Often she found that after truly considering the feedback, she could see the merit in it. When the suggestions were implemented, she gave credit to the team members who proposed them, which further encouraged open dialogue. Claire also sought external support to reinforce her new mindset. She hired a leadership coach for a few sessions, openly sharing her struggle with feedback. The coach helped her practice hearing difficult feedback in a role play and responding with questions and gratitude instead of defensiveness. They worked on separating her personal identity from her work so that critiques of a project or approach wouldn't feel like critiques of her worth. Bit by bit, Claire was rewiring her instincts. She learned to repeat to herself when hearing feedback, "This is to help the work. It's not an attack on me." She also learned that inviting feedback early often prevented bigger problems later, which in fact made her job easier, not harder. Part 4. The result. The change in team dynamics was not immediate, but over a couple of months it was evident. The atmosphere in Claire's team meetings became more relaxed and collaborative. People started voicing ideas and concerns that previously would have been hidden. One newer team member, who hadn't known the old Claire, openly offered a contrary opinion in a meeting, and instead of a hush, there was constructive discussion. The older team members watched this and realized, it's really different now. They too slowly became more candid, where before issues were discussed in whispers in the hallway. After meetings, now they were brought to the table and addressed. As a result, problems were caught earlier and solutions found faster. The team even managed to streamline a task that had always been a bottleneck, thanks to a suggestion Claire might once have dismissed, but now embraced. Claire's relationships with her team improved significantly. She made a point to have genuine one-on-one conversations, asking for feedback on how she could support them better, and each time thanking them for their honesty. Employees who had considered leaving decided to stay, mentioning to HR in follow-up chats that they felt the team culture was improving and that they felt heard. Her own stress levels went down too. No longer was she constantly worried about maintaining a facade of perfection. Paradoxically, by admitting she didn't have all the answers and encouraging others to contribute, she became a more effective leader. Her department's performance metrics began to improve, and upper Management took notice of the positive changes. When her next annual review came, it included commendations for fostering a more open and innovative team environment. Claire's transformation as a leader was evident to all who worked with her. She turned feedback from something she dreaded into something she actively sought. She went from avoiding mirrors that showed her flaws to using those mirrors to refine and grow. In learning to view feedback as a tool rather than a threat, she unlocked not only her team's potential, but her own. The fear that had kept her from listening was gone, replaced by a confidence that she could face any critique, learn from it, and become better. Claire's case demonstrates a profound truth. In leadership, as in life, feedback is not a foe to flee from, but a friend to learn from. Embracing that truth made her the leader she always aimed. To be one who is respected not for being infallible, but for being willing to improve. Chapter 8. The Burned-Out High Achiever. Part 1. The Pattern. Daniel was the kind of person everyone described as going above and beyond. In his career as a financial analyst, he consistently outperformed his peers. First in the office each morning, last out at night, he took on every project, responded to emails at midnight, and prided himself on never missing a deadline. His performance reviews were stellar, and he had a reputation as a rising star. But behind that polished exterior of success, Daniel was running on fumes. For years, he had sacrificed sleep, weekends, and even his health in pursuit of excellence. He told himself it was temporary, that once he reached the next promotion or finished the big project, he would ease up. Except that next goal always turned into another and another. He wore his work ethic like a badge of honor, but it came with dark circles under his eyes and a constant knot in his stomach. Lately, small mistakes had started creeping into his work. Nothing catastrophic, but uncharacteristic slip-ups that alarmed him. Even when he was exhausted, he found it hard to slow down. On the rare occasion he went home early, he felt a gnawing guilt, as if he were letting everyone down. Daniel's identity was so tied to achievement that the thought of doing less, even for a day, made him uneasy. He pushed through headaches with caffeine and brushed off his wife's concerns about his 70-hour work weeks. Inside, a voice kept insisting, "If I don't give 110% all the time, I'll fall behind. I have to keep proving myself." This relentless mindset had propelled him to success. Yes, but it was also driving him straight toward burnout. Part 2. The Break. One Monday afternoon, the breaking point arrived unannounced. Daniel was in a conference room, midway through a presentation to a big client, when suddenly his vision blurred and a wave of dizziness washed over him. His hands shook as he gripped the table. He lost his train of thought entirely. Words were coming out of his mouth, but he wasn't even sure if they made sense. Sensing something was wrong, a colleague quickly stepped in to finish the presentation. Daniel excused himself and stumbled to the bathroom, heart racing. He splashed water on his face and looked in the mirror to see a pale, drained version of himself staring back. It frightened him. That evening, at his wife's insistence, Daniel went to the doctor. After a battery of tests, the verdict was clear. There was nothing seriously wrong with him physically. He was experiencing severe stress and exhaustion. The doctor's advice was blunt. "You need to slow down, Daniel. If you keep this up, you're risking your heart, your mind, everything. Burnout is not a badge of honor. It's a signal you're pushing too hard." Driving home, Daniel felt a mix of relief that it wasn't a deadly illness and fear because he realized he was indeed burning himself out. When he arrived home, he found his 2 young children drawing get-well cards for him. His daughter's card said, "Please rest, Daddy." He sat down, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, he broke into tears in front of his family. In that vulnerable moment, Daniel confronted a truth he had been avoiding. He was not invincible, and the path he was on was not sustainable. All his achievements would mean nothing if he collapsed, or if he drifted away from the people he loved. He remembered something his father had told him years ago, which he'd ignored at the time. "Son, you can't pour from an empty cup." Only now did it hit him, what that truly meant. This was his wake-up call. Success at the expense of his well-being and relationships was not true success at all. Part 3. The Rewire. Daniel decided to make changes. Not later, but immediately. It started with an honest conversation with his boss. Nervously, he explained what happened and admitted he needed to rebalance his workload for the sake of his health. To his surprise, his boss was understanding and supportive, far from the condemnation Daniel had always feared. They agreed on a plan. Another analyst would assist with one of Daniel's projects, and Daniel would actually take the vacation time he'd banked for years, 2 weeks completely off. At first, the idea of stepping back made Daniel anxious. On his first day of vacation, he woke up at 6 a.m. out of habit, his mind racing about work. It took conscious effort to resist checking his email. Instead, he went for a morning jog, something he hadn't done in ages. To his astonishment, he enjoyed it. He spent that first week decompressing, catching up on sleep, taking his kids to the park, reading a novel that had sat unopened on his shelf. Little by little, the tightness in his chest eased. He laughed more. He realized how long it had been since he felt truly present in a moment without thinking of the next task. With some rest and distance from work, Daniel began to see things more clearly. One evening, he mapped out what had been driving him so relentlessly. He wrote down, "What am I afraid will happen if I slow down?" The answers surprised him. "People will think I'm a slacker. I won't be the best. I'll let everyone down." Seeing these fears on the paper made him question them. Were they really true? His recent experience suggested otherwise. His workplace hadn't fallen apart in his absence, and his boss had been supportive. It occurred to him that some of the pressure was self-imposed, a habit of his own mind. Returning to work with a new perspective, Daniel made practical adjustments to maintain balance. He set a rule for himself: no work emails after 7 p.m., and no routine work on Sundays. He communicated this boundary to his team, and, far from thinking less of him, many quietly appreciated it as it gave them permission to do the same. Daniel also forced himself to delegate more. Tasks that others could handle, he let them handle, even if they might do them a bit differently than he would. This was tough. At first, his perfectionism fought back, but he reminded himself that trusting his team was also a way of developing them and easing his load. He also incorporated small habits to take care of his physical and mental health. Twice a week he used his lunch break to go to the gym or take a walk outside instead of eating at his desk. He restarted an old hobby of playing the guitar in the evenings to unwind rather than squeezing in another hour of work. Whenever the old anxiety about not doing enough bubbled up, he practiced reframing it. Rest and recovery are part of doing my best. I work better when I'm not exhausted. It was a mantra he repeated, until he believed it. Part 4. The result. Over the next few months, the changes in Daniel's life were profound. Physically, he felt more energetic than he had in years. The tension headaches that used to plague him several times a week almost vanished. He could concentrate better during the workday, which ironically meant he got similar amounts of work done in less time. By not overloading himself, he found he made fewer mistakes and had more creative ideas because his mind wasn't perpetually fried. His team, empowered by the responsibilities he had given them, rose to the occasion and performed well. One of his colleagues even remarked, "You seem different lately, in a good way. More relaxed, but still on top of things." At home, the atmosphere improved as well. His wife noted that he was more present and patient, not just a ball of stress at the end of each day. He made it home for family dinners most nights now, and weekends became true. Rest time with his family. The kids were thrilled that Dad was around to play. Soccer in the yard or watch movies together. Daniel realized these moments were priceless, the very things he had been missing in his pursuit of professional success. Interestingly, at work, his career did not stall. In fact, it progressed. When promotion time came, Daniel was promoted to a senior role. His superiors noted not just his excellent analytical skills, but also his leadership in fostering a healthier work culture for his team. By learning to step back occasionally, he had actually made room for big-picture thinking and strategic insight, which got him noticed in a positive way. It was the opposite of what his old fears had predicted. Daniel's mindset shift from push harder at all costs to work smart and live balanced changed his life. He still valued hard work and took pride in his job, but he no longer equated working himself to the bone with success. He saw downtime and self-care as necessary investments in his long-term productivity and happiness rather than as weaknesses. The high achiever hadn't disappeared. He was just no longer burned out. He had learned that saying no or not right now sometimes wasn't a failure, but a strategic choice. And he discovered that his worth was not solely defined by his output. By taking care of himself, he was able to achieve in a sustainable way and enjoy the fruits of his labor. Daniel's story shows that real success is not a sprint at full speed until collapse. It's a marathon paced with wisdom, where taking a breath when needed can propel you even further in the long run. Chapter 9. The person who rewrote their inner critic. Part 1. The pattern. Sophie was by all outward accounts a capable, friendly, and intelligent person. But if one could hear the constant monologue in her head, they would have been shocked at how she spoke to herself. If Sophie made even a minor mistake, spilling coffee on her desk or forgetting a small detail, her inner voice would scream, "Ugh, I'm so stupid, I can't do anything right." When she looked in the mirror getting ready for work, that voice might sneer, "You look awful today. Who do you think you are? No one actually likes you." It was relentless. She would never say such cruel things to another soul, yet day in and day out she berated herself without mercy. This harsh inner critic had been with Sophie for as long as she could remember, perhaps originating from a strict upbringing where praise was rare and criticism common. Over the years, the voice had taken on a life of its own. It held her back from pursuing opportunities. Why apply for that promotion if? The voice insisted she wasn't good enough. It dampened her joy in social situations if a friend didn't. Return a call immediately. The voice whispered it was because Sophie was annoying and unworthy of friendship. The saddest part was that Sophie believed this voice. She assumed it was telling the truth, keeping her in check so she wouldn't become lazy or arrogant. In reality, it was chaining her to a perpetual feeling of not enough. This negative self-talk pattern was deeply ingrained, and it colored every experience with doubt and shame. Part 2. The break. The turning point for Sophie came on a day that started out poorly. She overslept and arrived late to a team meeting at work. Though it wasn't a critical error, her colleagues were understanding. The whole time she sat there, her inner critic was raging. "You're so unprofessional. Everyone must think you're a mess. Why can't you even get to work on time? You're going to get fired." By the meeting's end, she felt small and sick with anxiety. A close friend of hers, Alex, worked in the same company and caught up with her afterwards. Noticing her distress, he asked what was wrong. Initially, Sophie brushed it off, but Alex persisted kindly. Finally, she blurted out, "I was late and I know everyone must think I'm an idiot. I can't believe I did that. I'm such a failure." Alex looked at her, stunned. "Sophie," he said, "that's not what anyone thinks. You're always on time and work hard. One slip up and you call yourself a failure? Don't talk about my friend like that." She tried to laugh it off, saying she was just being honest. But Alex wasn't laughing. "If I came to you and said those things about myself," he asked, "what would you tell me?" Sophie paused. She knew exactly what she would say. She would reassure him that everyone makes mistakes, that it was no big deal, that he was absolutely not a failure. "So," Alex continued gently, "why is it okay to say those things to yourself?" That question hit Sophie like a splash of cold water. She didn't have an answer. She realized she had been giving herself zero grace, zero understanding, the very things she readily gave to others. Alex encouraged her to consider talking to someone or reading about this inner critic issue, sensing that her self-criticism was deeper than just this incident. That evening, still shaken by the conversation, Sophie went home and did something she normally avoided. She wrote down some of the frequent thoughts that ran through her mind, as if transcribing that nagging voice. Seeing the cruel words on paper made her heart ache. She imagined a little child being told these things and felt horrified. It was a powerful moment of awareness. This inner critic wasn't helping her. It was hurting her deeply. And perhaps she realized it was not infallible. It was just one part of her mind, one that she could perhaps change. This was her wake-up moment. Sophie decided she needed to rewrite the script in her head, because continuing on like this was no longer an option. Part 3. The Rewire. Sophie began the work of transforming her self-talk, slowly and deliberately. She started with a simple Commitment. For each negative thought she caught, she would pause and try to rephrase it in a kinder, more realistic way, as if she were talking to a good friend. On the morning after her revelation, she looked in the mirror, and immediately the old voice muttered, "You look so tired and awful." She caught it and took a breath. Out loud, she countered, "I had a rough night, but I'm still okay. I still look like me, and that's fine." It felt strange speaking to herself this way, almost like learning a new language, but she persisted. She also kept a small journal where each day she noted at least one thing she did well or liked about herself, even if it felt forced at first. "Handled a tough call at work calmly," she wrote one day. "Went for a walk instead of staying in bed all evening," on another. These were gentle facts that her inner critic usually brushed aside. Writing them down was like gathering evidence against that critical voice. When bigger setbacks occurred, Sophie practiced responding with compassion. One afternoon, she received a piece of constructive criticism from her manager about an assignment. In the past, that would have sent her inner critic into a tailspin, yelling that she was incompetent. This time, when she felt the familiar sting of self-criticism rising, "See, you messed up again. You're no good at this job." She consciously stopped and took a few deep breaths. She reminded herself of a new perspective. Feedback was about the work, not a judgment of her worth. She told herself, "Okay, I have some areas to improve, but I also have a lot of things I do well. I'm capable of learning from this." It wasn't an instant magic cure. She still felt uneasy, but she noticed she didn't spiral as far down as before. To help reinforce her new mindset, Sophie also sought resources. She read a self-help book about self-compassion that Alex had recommended. From it, she learned that treating oneself with kindness is not about being delusional or complacent. It's about giving yourself the same understanding you'd give to someone you care about. This concept resonated deeply. She started practicing short meditations in the morning, focused on positive affirmations like, "I am enough," and "I deserve understanding." She even gave that negative voice in her head a nickname, the critic, so that when it spoke up, she could mentally say, "Oh, the critic is talking again," and then choose not to take its words as truth. Part 4. The result. The changes in Sophie unfolded gradually, but noticeably. A few months later, a colleague complimented her on a report she wrote. Instead of her usual response, "Oh, it's nothing, I'm sure there are mistakes," she smiled and said, "Thank you, I put a lot of effort into it." It felt good to accept praise, rather than deflect it. Her friend Alex observed that she seemed happier and more confident. She was participating more in group conversations at work instead of hanging back, and even her posture improved, as if a weight had been lifted. It's not that Sophie never had negative thoughts anymore. She did, but they were quieter, and she was quicker to counter them. Her journal of daily positives grew thick, and on hard days she would flip through past entries to remind herself of progress and strengths. She also found that by not constantly tearing herself down, she had more mental energy to focus on things that mattered. For instance, she finally enrolled in an evening course to develop a skill she'd been interested in for years, something she previously avoided because her inner critic told her she'd fail. With her new supportive inner voice, She approached it with curiosity instead of fear, and she ended up excelling and enjoying herself. Perhaps the most profound change was in how Sophie felt. There was a new warmth in her chest when she thought about herself, a sense of being on her own side rather than being her own worst enemy. This reflected in her overall demeanor. Those around her sensed the change too. Her boss trusted her, with more responsibilities, seeing that she carried herself with more assurance now. In her personal life, Sophie found it easier to connect with people when she wasn't second-guessing every word she said or assuming she was unlikable. She even began dating someone new, allowing herself to believe that she deserved love and kindness. By rewriting her inner script, Sophie fundamentally transformed her experience of life. She learned that the voice in her head, while persistent, was not absolute truth, and it could be challenged and changed. In silencing the cruel critic and nurturing a kinder inner voice, she unlocked confidence and peace that had long been missing. Sophie's journey illustrates that sometimes the most important conversation we have is the one we have with ourselves. Change that conversation, and you change your world. Chapter 10. The Pattern Revealed. Throughout these chapters, we've journeyed through a diverse set of lives. A student who discovered her ability to grow, a professional who learned to step up, an entrepreneur who found courage to start, an athlete who let go of fear, an overthinker who found clarity in decision, a creative who embraced his own path, a leader who opened her ears, a high achiever who rediscovered balance, and an individual who turned her harsh inner voice into an ally. On the surface, their stories differed in every detail. Different ages, different challenges, different goals. Yet if you listen closely, a single pattern emerges, like a golden thread woven through each narrative. In every case, the pivotal change did not come from some outside rescue or a stroke of external luck. It came from within, from a shift in mindset. Each person began stuck in a pattern of thinking that limited them. Emily believed intelligence was fixed. David assumed he wasn't leadership material. Priya feared failure so much she wouldn't begin. Jordan equated losing with worthlessness. Maya thought a perfect decision was the only way forward. Ethan saw others' success as his loss. Claire felt feedback was a threat. Daniel defined himself solely by overwork, and Sophie accepted every cruel word her inner critic said. These initial mindsets were the hidden barriers holding them back more than any external circumstance. Then came the break, an awakening moment for each of them. It was the instance when the old belief cracked and light came in. Whether it was a teacher's revelation, a missed promotion, a layoff, a heart-to-heart conversation, a frightening close call, or a friend's tough love, something made them pause and question the truth of their limiting story. Awareness dawned. They realized, each in their own way, it doesn't have to be like this. That realization is the seed of any change. It's the moment the mind opens to a new possibility. From there, they moved into the rewire phase, gradually replacing old habits and thoughts with new, empowering ones. Not overnight, and not without effort. Emily practiced and learned she could improve. David started speaking up and taking initiative. Priya broke her big dream into small steps and learned by doing. Jordan trained himself to run free of fear. Maya imposed deadlines on herself and learned to trust her choices. Ethan stepped away from comparison and poured energy into his own art. Claire actively invited feedback and practiced humility in leadership. Daniel set boundaries and learned to value rest and balance. Sophie countered her negative self-talk with compassion and discovered her self-worth. In each story, these rewiring efforts were incremental, little daily decisions, small shifts in perspective, conscious new behaviors that, over time, rewrote the script of their lives. And finally, each arrived at a result that reflected their internal transformation. External changes followed internal shifts as surely as dawn follows night. Emily's grades and confidence soared. David earned the promotion and newfound fulfillment. Priya launched her business and gained courage by doing so. Jordan won his race and, more importantly, rediscovered the joy of his sport. Maya started, moving forward in life, making choices without perpetual regret. Ethan's creativity flourished, and his unique work found recognition. Claire's team thrived under her open leadership, and she became a stronger leader. Daniel achieved success without losing himself, enjoying a healthier, happier life. Sophie found peace within and let her true talents and personality shine. In each case, when the person changed how they thought and what they believed about themselves or their situation, the reality around them eventually changed too. This is the pattern of a mindset makeover. It starts with identifying the hidden, limiting belief that forms. The pattern. It takes a break of awareness, sometimes born of pain, sometimes of insight, to crack that belief. It progresses with the rewire, those deliberate changes in thinking and behavior that reinforce a new belief system. And it culminates in the result, tangible changes in life that reflect the new mindset. This 4-part journey is not a one-time magic trick, but a repeatable formula for growth. Chances are, as you listen to these stories, you recognized some of your own thoughts and struggles in one or more of these individuals. If so, take heart. Change is possible for you just as it was for them. Why is mindset the hidden variable? Because it often operates silently, beneath the surface, influencing everything until we bring it to light. You saw it in each case study, the moment they named there. Limiting belief, its power began to diminish. Once they changed their perspective, believing in growth. Instead of limitation, in courage instead of fear, in balance instead of all or nothing, their actions changed accordingly, and so did their outcomes. Mindset was the key that unlocked their potential. As we conclude, reflect on your own life. What patterns of thought might be holding you back? Is there a small voice saying, "I can't," or "I must not fail," or "I'm not enough"? That might be your hidden variable to address. Consider this an invitation to your own break moment. Challenge that voice. Question that assumption. Then plan your rewire. What new thought or habit can you practice to replace the old? Start small, be consistent and patient with yourself. Lastly, envision the result. How might your world change if your mindset shifts? The individuals in these chapters were ordinary people who made an extraordinary discovery that by changing their minds, they changed their lives. You have that same power within you. The pattern is revealed, and the path is in front of you. Your mindset makeover is yours to craft. Remember that the journey is ongoing. Even after a result, life will present new challenges, and with them, new beliefs to reshape. But now you have seen what's possible. The hidden variable is no longer hidden from you. Use it wisely. Cultivate a mindset that serves your growth, your values, and your well-being. When you do, you become the author of your own story, not just a character reacting to what life throws at you. And as you write the next chapters of your life with a transformed mind, you may find that the world around you transforms in turn. That is the promise of a mindset makeover, the power to change from the inside out, and in so doing, to open doors that once seemed locked. The next case study, the next success story, could very well be yours. If these case studies resonated, don't just listen. Apply. Pick one belief you've been carrying and question it. That's where change begins. If you value thoughtful, practical growth like this, subscribe to Be Believe, Become TV. This channel is a living library, not a feed. Return often. Repetition builds identity. And remember, mindset is invisible until it changes everything.